Welcome, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Mack. I am the creative strategist and creative director of Mississauga Arts Council. This is Susan Dernan. She is the administration lead of the Mississauga Arts Council. We would like to thank you for attending tonight's TD Cultural Lab webinar, Effective Grant Writing Strategies for Artists with Rohit Mehta and Maura Broadhurst, presented by Mississauga Arts Council. TD Cultural Lab is generously sponsored by TD Bank Group.
The Mississauga Arts Council is dedicated to enabling the growth of the arts by creating opportunity and connection between artists and residents in Mississauga and beyond. Celebrating our milestone 40th anniversary this year, the Mississauga Arts Council is a registered charity dedicated to accelerating progress toward the attainment of our vision of Mississauga as a vibrant cultural community where arts and culture thrive. Our mission is to empower the arts economy by creating more opportunities and capacity, connecting artists to audiences and each other, and celebrating artists' achievements. We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe Chippewa, Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit.
A couple of quick reminders. Please turn your video off. Please keep your microphone muted. If you wish to make a comment or if you have a question, please use the comment section. We will be moderating the question and answer portion of tonight's webinar and ask that you use the chat feature to ask your questions throughout the presentation. If you wish to change the view you are seeing, there is a button in the top right-hand corner with the viewing options.
All right, let's get started. We are thrilled to present tonight's webinar, Effective Grant Writing Strategies for Artists, with Rohit Mehta and Maura Broadhurst. It is our pleasure to introduce the presenters. Rohit Mehta is the founder and president of DoGood Fundraising. A University of Toronto graduate, Rohit has been active in the nonprofit sector for 16 years. He was appointed to a 5-year term with the grant review term of the Ontario Trillium Foundation and served a 2-year term with the Grant Review Committee of the Ministry of Children and Youth Services Youth Opportunities Fund. Rohit reviewed and assessed over 300 grant applications and distributed over $60 million in funding to community-based nonprofits, charities, and grassroots groups. His experience working in fundraising roles with several nonprofit and charities and over a decade volunteering as a board member and leader within the sector led him to start DoGood Fundraising. The business helps nonprofits, charities, and artists to raise funds through grant writing, funder research, and professional development training. Learn more at dogoodfundraising.ca.
Also with us tonight is Maura Broadhurst, the Arts Sector Development Officer at Ontario Arts Council. At the OAC, she manages the Arts Service Organizations program, as well as programs in the audience development stream. Prior to this position, she was cross-sectoral associate officer working in project programs in the different discipline and activity sections of the council. And she was the Arts Investment Fund officer from 2011 to 2013. Maura previously worked at the Lasham Gallery, the McMichael Canadian Art Collection, London Regional Art and Historical Museums, the Living Arts Centre, Canadian Stage Company, and the Roshahi Dance Theatre. Maura taught courses in museum studies and contemporary curatorial practices at the University of Western Ontario in London. She received her bachelor's from the University of Waterloo with a major in art history and a specialization in arts administration, and her master's of arts from Concordia University. Let's turn things over to Rohit.
Thanks very much for the introduction, and thanks to everyone for joining us on the webinar today. So I'm going to get started, and I'm going to be speaking about effective grant writing for artists, and then Maura will be speaking specifically from the Ontario Arts Council perspective. And so you're in for a lot of great information today as artists who are seeking grants. A little bit about the company. So my small business, DoGood Fundraising Solutions, provides all-inclusive grant writing, prospect research, and professional development training services, all with the goal of helping you raise more money. So today we'll be speaking about a few things. First, 10 common grant writing mistakes, common mistakes that are made when writing grants, and I'll go through each of them and tell you a little bit about how you can avoid making those mistakes. We'll talk about arts grants opportunities specifically. So I've picked out a number of opportunities from across the sector, hopefully something for everyone, and we'll talk about what those are and the deadlines. And we'll end with a discussion and any questions that you might have before we turn things over to Maura. So let's get started with 10 common grant writing mistakes. And the team from MAC is monitoring the chat, so feel free to add any ideas or thoughts or questions that come up. And I'm kind of keeping an eye out of the corner of my eye. If there's something, a burning question that needs to be asked, I'll try to address that as I go. So out of the top 10 most common grant writing mistakes, number 10 has to be not providing statistics or data. So when you're writing a grant as an artist, you need to make sure that you tell your story. Talk about the results, talk about what you have accomplished as an artist. And this includes number of albums sold, what exhibitions you've presented in, how many, what productions you've put on, when did those take place. This data really indicates what the demand is for your art or for your professional practice. So it's always important to include statistics that speak to that work rather than providing any sort of broad information. Get specific and talk about your work. Top 10 most common grant writing mistakes. Number 9, submitting late applications. Very frequent issue. We all do it. It's 11:59. You're sweating. You're about to press submit. Don't do it. Often these online systems crash. They stop working at the last minute, and it can be very stressful, right? So make sure you fill in your online applications in advance. Press submit as early as possible, maybe even the day before, and always save a copy before you press submit, because you never know, you may not be able to get that back, and then it can be a little embarrassing to win the grant and then ask the funder if they can give you your grant application. And when in doubt, just reach out to the funder. Many times we've submitted a grant and there's been a technical glitch here and there, and I don't hesitate. I immediately get in touch with the funder, let them know what's gone wrong. In every single one of those instances, they've responded back, they've recognized what happened, and things got fixed. But if you don't say anything, you can't really get that help. So don't submit late applications, but if something goes wrong at the last minute, reach out. Top 10 most common grant writing mistakes. Number 8, not utilizing attachments. They're there for a reason, and you're an artist. Your work needs to be seen, heard. The assessors need to experience your art, so do not leave this blank. Make sure that you use every attachment available. Provide them with really a look at your work and your professional practice. You can include testimonials, photos, always include captions. Newspaper clippings, even awards that you've won, if you've been featured somewhere, you've been interviewed, or you just want to present a brief video about your work, maybe show your visual art, maybe show a performance. Always use attachments. If they're there, use them. Number 7, underselling your work. How many of us creative folks don't blow our own horn? Probably a lot of us, and we really need to do a better job at that. So I encourage you to show a history or a track record of your past success, talk about examples of your work, talk about accomplishments, and try not to judge yourself, right? So if you've only produced 5 albums and you don't think that's a big deal, just put it in there. And for you, that's a great accomplishment. And maybe for a huge musician, that might not be, but it's your accomplishment. So don't undersell yourself, put that best foot forward, and don't hold back. This is your moment to shine, to brag a little bit. And so by not underselling your work, you're more likely to be selected and therefore funded. Top 10 most common mistakes. Number 6, not expressing urgency. So especially in COVID times and post-COVID, artists have been struggling a lot. There haven't been performance opportunities, revenues are low, we're all at home, which makes networking and showcasing our work fairly difficult. So indicate those challenges, create a little bit of urgency, and if you don't express that urgency, then why would funders prioritize your grant application over others, right? So make sure that you're creating urgency using persuasive language such as, this grant is essential to me because this funding will enable me to immediately, without this grant, my artistic practice will, right? So you think about what that means for you and your work, but urgency helps funders prioritize. Don't forget that. Top 10 most common mistakes. Number 5, starting from scratch. Don't do it. Keep a folder on your computer with all the key documents that you need. What does it cost for you to operate your artistic practice this year? What are some strategic pitches where you've spent a bit of time putting together a really great bio or a really great overview of your work? Maybe you've presented all your work chronologically in a really nice way. Hang on to that. Common attachments to include are images of your work with descriptions, your bio, very important, team member bios, right? So many of the arts grants that are out there actually ask to tell us about your team, who's collaborating with you, tell us about them. That can be really hard information to get every single time. You also want records of your productions, your work produced, have those dates, have those timelines. Every time I upload a video or a piece of media, it always asks for a description. When was this taken? Who is in this, right? So do not start from scratch. Remember that when you're putting in the hard work today, that work is also going to be usable tomorrow. And so don't start from scratch, please. Top 10 most common grant writing mistakes. Number 4, no commitment to long-term projects. So many funders do fund on a project-by-project basis, but it can be clear to us funders when it's been invented only to win the grant, right? Everything shouldn't just be starting right now for the first time. Try and have some long-term work that you do over time. Maybe it's a particular style, right? Maybe you're a visual artist and you've decided to go in a certain direction and pursue that style. And now you're applying for a professional development grant. And 6 months from now, you're applying for an exhibition grant. And 6 months later, you're applying for a touring grant, all within that practice. So be focused and committed to long-term projects. Stick with a certain artistic style and practice and be known for that practice. And I think that will attract more funders to support you as they get to know you. And funders like Maura do get to know you on a personal basis. So be sure to do something that makes you stand out. And just remember that it's really a relationship, right? So the more you're committed to long-term work, the more you keep putting that out there, you're building a relationship with everyone you're asking for money. And I think that will result in more grants. Top 10 mistakes. Number 3, spelling and grammar. This is a tough one because as a past grant reviewer myself, I remember reviewing grants sometimes and looking at it and thinking, this doesn't even make any sense. What does this say? Only because there were spelling and grammar mistakes. It can be frustrating. It can be confusing. It just makes the application harder to read. And of course, it reduces your chances of success. So why not author your grant applications in Microsoft Word or Google Docs? They have a really great automated spell check within there, and then copy and paste that content onto the online portals, onto the online application forms. All your proposals should be thoroughly reviewed. And this goes back to the point about not submitting grants at the last minute. When you have a little bit more time, you don't rush, you don't make as many mistakes, and that could make the difference in your grant. Top 10 most common mistakes on grants. Number 2, using too much jargon. So I always say, write so that reviewers get it. You need to write in a way that everybody, common people, are going to understand what you're trying to say and they're going to buy into your work. So using very complex language or acronyms can make it increasingly difficult to understand. Acronyms in particular, I have actually been reviewing a grant and then I read the acronym and I think, what does that mean? And then I have to go back to the top, look up the acronym and keep going. And as you do that, you start to lose what's written between the top and the bottom. So maybe avoid acronyms, or maybe use maybe 1 or 2 if they're absolutely important, but focus on using the funder's own language. Look at the funder's website, look at the guidelines. How do they refer to that artistic practice? Keep referring to it that way, all right? And a tip is to have a friend or family member read your proposal. Maybe someone who's not within your particular artistic practice, or someone who's not in your band or in your group. If somebody outside gets it, then that means it's probably fairly clear and easy to understand and read. And the top most common mistake on grant applications, not answering the question. Very frustrating. Answer the question. It's so important to reread your responses, read them out loud. Sometimes I pace around the room looking at a response and reading it out loud, making sure I ask myself, did I answer the question? And if you didn't, what you need to do is you need to go back and remove anything that's unnecessary. We call it fluff sometimes, right? Vague statements, unnecessary statistics, extra information. Try to actually include the answer to the question right in the first sentence. You know, how many years have you been in this practice? I've been involved in this for 10 years. Then you go on and you explain the 10 years. Make it easy for funders to find the answers to your question, put them right in the beginning of the answer. And with these tips, you should be able to be successful in your grant applications. Okay, so if there's any questions in the chat, let's just have a look here. Number 10, mistake number 10 about not including data or statistics. Can this be qualitative data like reviews? Yes, absolutely. Data can be qualitative and quantitative. So you can certainly put in a review of your work if somebody critiqued your work, if somebody presented your work or featured it somewhere. Top 10 mistakes number 4, keep your pitches and your important documents. So what are some good strategic pitches? I think I'm gonna answer that a bit differently. I'm gonna say you have submitted good strategic pitches. You have created pitches to maybe a bank, or maybe you pitched to the Ontario Arts Council. Hang on to that, save that document, and when you're starting on your next grant application, start there. Okay, I hope that helped. And so now we're gonna get into arts grant opportunities. Have a pen and pencil handy because there's quite a few opportunities. I believe this information will also be made available to you later on. So all arts grants have a sort of a similar structure, in my opinion. They begin with an online portal. So as Maura will tell you, with Ontario Arts Council, it's NOVA. So know these portals, know the websites, have them bookmarked. And so oftentimes you have to provide your artist bio, a CV, a history, and then you have specific questions related to your project. What is the impact on yourself as an artist? What is the broader impact of your professional work? Give us a budget with detailed expenses. And oftentimes we'll keep going, asking for more and more information about your project and what you're proposing to do. And finally, you have a number of declaration pages, you sign it and you submit. And a lot of these systems are very easy to use. They're online, you can use them on a tablet, use them on a computer. And so if you ever have challenges with that, you reach out to the funder and try and get some assistance with navigating that if you need that help. Okay, on March 4th, Ontario Creates Industry Development Program will offer between $5,000 and $60,000, but they'll only pay for up to 75% of your budget. Are you in the book industry, magazine, film, television, digital media sectors? This one's for you, and that's a 5 o'clock deadline. Ontario Creates offers their film fund. And so the film fund is, of course, for feature film projects. So whether you're developing, you're producing, if you need financing for that production, this is the grant. It's huge, up to $400,000 from the provincial government. And that closes March 10th, again, by 5 p.m. So, if you're ever looking for someone to review a grant application that you're writing for grants like this, please connect with me through Mississauga Arts Council, and we can always provide you with support on these sorts of projects. Continuing along in March, Toronto Arts Council has their long-term dance projects. So they'll give $15,000 per year for up to 3 years. You can actually get up to $45,000. And this is really about mid-career and established dance artists. And so you should be someone who's been working in this field for some time, and it's an opportunity to develop and present your work or a program of work. So reach out to the Ontario Arts Council for that March 15th deadline. Continuing along, in April, the Ontario Arts Council Dance Projects closes. So that's April 8th specifically. And I want to point out that they actually have 4 different categories here. You can get up to $5,000 for the development of new dance work. You can get up to $20,000 for the production and presentation of dance, $15,000 for sort of series and festivals, and up to $5,000 for sector development, developing the dance sector as a whole. So whoever is in this field, you know who you are, you know what type of work you're doing, visit their website on the OntarioArtsCouncil.ca website, and note that April 8th deadline. And people like Maura are a great resource because she has a lot of colleagues at OAC who directly work on these. So if you have specific questions, do hang on to them. Continuing along in April, Ontario Arts Council music creation projects, up to $4,000 for self-directed creation and commissioning of up to $20,000. So if you're commissioning a music creation project, this is the grant to really pay attention to. And it's really for artists at all stages of their music careers, all genres, all styles, as long as you're creating original music works. So that's April 14th, Ontario Arts Council music creation. Continuing along here in May, there's the Visual Artists Creation Projects. So that's early May, May 4th. And again, I want to point out the three categories. Emerging artists may apply for up to $5,000. Mid-career artists, $7,500, and established artists can apply for up to $15,000. So really, there is a little bit more support for those who are established, and I think that makes sense. And so any professional artist in Ontario who's creating new work should consider applying for this. There's a whole range. They really support everyone, and they're looking for supporting excellence, regional activity, diverse artists, diverse communities. And so if you feel that you haven't received a lot of grants or you've been hesitant about applying to grants, these are the opportunities, and this is the time to really reach out to organizations like Mississauga Arts Council, reach out to funders like the OAC, and start applying to these grants, because now is the best time to go for it. And Canada Council for the Arts has a May 19th cutoff date for their professional development grant for arts professionals. So this is everyone on this call may be eligible. Please read the guidelines, but you can apply to up to $10,000 from Canada Council. And what they're doing is they're trying to encourage you to really participate in professional development, gain some knowledge in a variety of opportunities. Maybe it's a workshop, maybe it's a conference, maybe it's some one-on-ones with a mentor. These types of grants are awesome because they're very open and flexible. So consider Canada Council, go on their website, start by creating a profile, and it has to get approved before you apply. So don't wait until May 18th. Apply for that profile today, because it can take up to 30 days to get approved. And here's up to $10,000 just to improve your own professional practice. What an opportunity. Also in May, interesting one, Radio Star Maker Fund. So I was on a music managers forum just a week ago, and somebody shared this opportunity for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Up to $25,000 for any music-related expenses, recording, promotion, publicity, advertising, marketing, touring, even creating videos. So every musician, who is of color, who identifies with being Black, Indigenous, people of color, you should really look into this one. Now you have to show full length or bundle sales of at least 1,500 units to qualify. So make sure that you do fit within that guideline. And interestingly, if you've been nominated for a Grammy, a Juno, the Polaris Prize over the past 5 years, you automatically qualify. So hopefully there's some folks on here who are potentially eligible for those awards, and up to $25,000, huge opportunity, closes at May 20th. So continuing along here, especially for musicians, because I do get a lot of inquiries from musicians, Factor has their juried sound recording. Now they'll give up to 75% of your budget to a maximum of $67,500 for general artist. Factor has general artist, artist 2, artist 3. If you're a musician, you probably know what I'm talking about. If not, let me just say that the more sales and the more exposure you have as an artist, the higher you go in Factor's scale. And so I've really just focused on general artist here. Up to $10,000 can be spent in the sound recording component, because so many people who are general artists are just recording at this stage. And so I wanted to share that. Now, this grant contributes towards the cost of acquiring, producing, making a full-length album. So really think about whether Factor can be a good fit. Today's the 18th, and on the 26th of February, that's the deadline to submit your profile to Factor to be considered as part of their artist profile system. I believe every certain increments throughout the year, you can submit your profile and they'll go and they'll reassess it. That is how you climb to Artist 2, Artist 3. So get on Factor's website and submit that profile if you are a musician, someone who's recording. And consider that this also funds the cost of a production, a full-length sound recording, even pays for marketing and promotion. So a huge opportunity for recording artists, up to $67,500. I think that deadline's in May. I was looking at last year and it seems to be around mid-May. So just stay tuned for their announcement there. But here you heard it from me, it's probably in May. Here's one that's open, and it's a little bit of a smaller grant. It's up to $2,000, actually 75% of total costs up to $2,000. But they'll cover a year of songwriting initiatives. So whether it's domestic, I don't know who's doing international right now, but international travel, co-writing sessions, songwriting camps, workshops, showcases. Like, this is the perfect opportunity if you are just getting into songwriting. You actually have to have 3 commercially exploited copyrights, which means you have to have done some work in this area, and you have to have 10 songs written or co-written in the past year. But I think a lot of songwriters are there, and so I want you to be aware of this if you are in the songwriting field. That's a rolling deadline; it's ongoing, so you can even submit next week if you want. And moving into June, Toronto Arts Council has a playwrights program that closes in mid-June on June 15th. So $2,000 for new or emerging playwrights with little or no history of production, and then $8,000 for mid-career or senior playwrights. So there you have to have a history of professional production. This is a really great way to support playwrights and support the writing of stage plays, a really important part of plays. And so, if you are a playwright, I encourage you to reach out to Toronto Arts Council, go on their website, have a look at this opportunity. It's a good one. And moving on, another Toronto Arts Council grant is the Writers Program. So this one closes June 15th as well. $5,000 for writers in early stages and $10,000 for writers with an established writing career. So if you're someone in the literary sector and you know that you're creating new work, so you have something in progress, take note of this grant. Tons of genres: fiction, literary nonfiction, poetry, oral traditions such as storytelling, even dub, rap, and spoken word. So, you may or may not realize as an artist who's doing things like dub, rap, and spoken word that you can fall under the Writers Program, but you can. And if you have questions about that, certainly do start on their website. Start by reading about the grant and note that June 15th deadline. Okay, and as we keep going here, we have the Ontario Arts Council Visual Arts Projects. So I'm not going to get into it too much because we're lucky to have Maura with us today, but they do give up to $10,000 for presentation and up to $10,000 for curatorial research and development. So curators as well, there's a category there. And so we encourage organizations, groups, collectives, independent curators to present any sort of an opportunity where you're exhibiting, you're documenting work, you're disseminating the work of various artists. These are the folks who should be applying to this grant. And it's also about programs that actually provide professional development opportunities for visual artists. So if you're a visual artist and you're looking into a specific opportunity for you to grow your practice, have a look at their website, have a look at some of the details, and see if you can get up to $10,000. And that closes June 17th. So that wraps up that part of the presentation. I'm just going to glance at the chat here. Have a look here. Are Mississauga artists eligible for Toronto Arts Council grants? No, but Toronto Arts Council grants are sometimes applied to by Mississauga artists. We know so many artists do work in the general vicinity of Toronto and area, and so it does make sense to look at the requirements. I believe residency is a requirement, and so there are artists who live in Mississauga and work in Toronto, and maybe they have their professional practice taking place there. And so definitely do consult Toronto Arts Council if you feel that you may be eligible for their grants. Does writing grants include screenwriting? Screenwriting, yes, absolutely. When you look at those, specifically the writing grants, you really need to read the guidelines. They always publish the guidelines. Very important to take a few minutes to read and look in there to make sure that it's not excluded. Every funder will include a list of eligible projects and ineligible projects. Always make sure that you're not in the ineligible list, because then it might not be worth your time applying. But certainly reach out to the funder when in doubt, reach out, because I think many times, even when we're unsure as a grant writing business, when we're unsure about whether a certain project is a good fit or not, we will just reach out, and people like Maura are so happy to provide information, guidance, and direction, because they want you to apply and they want you to succeed. Can you explain the commissions component of the grant? I'm not really sure what that question means. If you want to put a little bit more detail in the chat, just so that I know what you're talking about with commissions, we can certainly try and address it. And yeah, I think these are all great questions. I'm gonna maybe turn it over to Maura as well. She might be able to provide a little bit more on that. But thanks so much for listening, guys, and certainly reach out through the Mississauga Arts Council if you need help with grants.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rohit. That was very informative, and I'm sure we have lots of great comments thanking you for your presentation, and I'm sure there's going to be a few more questions at the end. So why don't we pass things over to Maura, who's going to give us more information about the Ontario Arts Council grants.
Great, thank you. And thank you to the Mississauga Arts Council for the invitation. It is one of the things I most like about this job is to speak with artists like yourselves and connect with you. We all know that grant writing and submitting grants can be a little bit intimidating, especially when going through a government agency. And so my main goal is to remind you that it is just people like me there, and we really would rather talk to you than push papers around. So, my main message to you is to please, as Rohit said, reach out if you have questions. That is what our job is. That being said, I'm going to share, I hope, some general information with you. There's specific questions about specific programs in the chat, which maybe we can get to. Although, again, the specific questions, best to talk to the people running those programs just to make sure you get the most accurate answers. But I can maybe give a bit of information that will be helpful. So I too am going to share my screen. And yeah, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the OAC in general, how our applications are set up, and how you can find out what you should apply to and how you can apply, again, using our online system, a little bit about what you need to know about that. Then what happens after you've submitted your application. And I think that's the part that often can be quite mysterious. You think it goes behind some curtains, and then all of a sudden, several months later, the curtains open up again. So I really would like to share with you what happens during that period, and then what happens once you're notified if you are the recipient of a grant. So we'll go through that together. So the Ontario Arts Council, we are an arm's length agency of the Government of Ontario, and we are funded through the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Culture Industries. So this means that our budget comes 100% from the Government of Ontario, and it is here to support arts activity in our province. We have a double mandate to foster the creation and production of art, so we're here for the artists and the arts groups and organizations, but for the benefit of all Ontarians. So we also want to make sure that we're remembering that the people of Ontario need to have access to this professional art activity. We have a whole bunch of different kinds of programs that we run, so we've grouped them into 4 main streams, is what we call them. By far the biggest is creating and presenting. So for most people, you're creating some work and you're presenting it to an audience, whether no matter what discipline you work in, whether that's dance or music or visual arts or literature, that's the bulk of your activity probably. So you'll find many programs, again, mostly defined by discipline, although not all, to support you in that kind of work. Building audiences and markets. So this is when you're looking at beyond what your current reach. So our touring programs are the most obvious example of that. engaging communities and schools. So of course, we all know that artists wear many hats, and many people, in addition to doing their own creation and presenting, will do work in whether it's in the school system itself as a visiting artist, or maybe through your library, or you participate in a public summer camp or something like that. That's where you're going to find support in that stream. And then developing careers and art services. So this is for the professional arts community, where you can look to find support for professional development activities, either as an individual, as a practicing artist, or as an arts at the arts administration side of things, or as an organization. So we have different programs there too. Our programs, we have two main ways that we support the arts activity: project grants and operating grants. Operating grants are reserved for not-for-profit organizations that have sort of more of an ongoing relationship with the OAC, have been, organizations that have been running for several years, have a bit of a track record, have ongoing activity that they need annual support for. So that's sort of a different kind of grant that I'm not going to talk about too much today. Today, I'm going to talk about our project grants. Most artists come to an agency like the Ontario Arts Council, but it probably is true for others as well, through their discipline. So you're a dance artist, you come through our dance programs, or you are a writer and you come through our literature programs. But sometimes it's more your activity. So again, yes, I'm a visual artist, but most of my work is through the schools. So maybe you're going to come through that kind of program. And all of the above is fine. There is no right or wrong way to start. So, whatever makes sense and whatever reflects where you are in your practice and in what you are doing is the way to go. At this point, I'm going to stop sharing this for a moment, and I'm going to go to our website, because again, that is the main way. You're welcome to call us, but the main way people find out these days about our activities and our programs is through our website. And in fact, it is helpful if you can go to the website first to find out a little bit of information. So I'm going to share our website. And here you are, the Ontario Arts Council website. Our website, you'll see, obviously you're going to go to the grants tab, and you'll see the streams down the left-hand side, and then the discipline, and I'll speak about our priority groups in a moment, and then general information about our granting programs as well. Any of these tabs will take you to a list of programs. You can find them. You'll find the same programs eventually, depending on which way you want to go in. So again, if you're a writer, you would go to the literature page, and each discipline is set up the same way on our website. So here's literature, and then you see all the granting programs. So we have programs for those the Francophone artists in our province. So you'll see those, but you'll see there's some literary creation projects. Some are for performance. So for spoken word artists, for example, literary creation projects works for publications. If you're an organization, maybe you have a festival in your community, a literary festival in the summertime, perhaps. Maybe you're going to look at some of those project programs. And then each one, of course, will give you more information if you go into it. So literary creation projects, and again, this, you'll see very similar type of programs in the different disciplines. So you would go in to learn more, and this is where you're going to start getting into some of the more detailed information that it is, you do need to look through, and it's best if you look through these things before you call us, because then we can have a more informed conversation with you. You don't have to, we can help you get there, but we're probably going to direct you to these pages eventually. So doing a little bit of looking and research, again, whether it's the OAC or any other funder, a little bit of research before you call is always, it's going to make your call more productive. And you'll see every page of an OAC program has a contact person's name with their email and phone number. So this is my colleague Rohana would be the person you'd call if you think this is the program for you. And you'll talk to her about what your project is that you're thinking about, and she'll help you decide whether this is a good fit or whether you really should be going somewhere else. She will remind you of things that you need to know that make your project eligible, what you absolutely need to include in your application, maybe some changes to the program. Even if you're familiar with this program, you've applied applied to it in the past, it's not a terrible idea still to connect and make sure that there's been no changes or updates to the program. So you're going to find out what the program is about, when the deadline dates are. In this case, there's just one on September 2nd, and how much you can ask for, and then who can apply. Eligible applicants, and you'll see it's quite a list, so you do want to go through it. And then ineligible applicants, what the program will fund, and then again what it does not fund, what you are required to do if you do receive a grant in your final report. And then down at the bottom of each of the program pages, again, they all have the similar headings, so what you would need to apply, and there's information here for you, and then some definitions. Okay, so all of our programs look like that same format. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that and go back to my presentation. If I can find it. Here we go. Okay. So that's just what the program looked like. Now, I had mentioned the priority groups. At the OAC, for our current strategic plan that we are working under, which is actually up for renewal. So any of you who are into that kind of thing, we will be looking to consult with the community in the springtime to establish our new strategic plan for the next 5 years, and establishing what the priorities will be moving forward. But currently, and for many years now, these groups of artists have been priorities for the Ontario Arts Council. So artists of color, deaf artists and artists with disabilities, Francophone artists, Indigenous artists, new generation artists, and that's artists between the ages of 18 and 30, and artists living in regions outside of Toronto. So that's everybody in the province that has a postal code that does not start with an M. So the Toronto postal code is M, everybody else is not, and that's what we mean by that priority, including, of course, Mississauga artists. These groups of artists have been identified as priorities because, for different reasons, throughout history, but also to this day, they have encountered barriers in accessing public fund for their art. So we've highlighted them. In many cases, there are specific programs just for artists that fall into some of these priorities. But for all of our assessment processes, we always ask assessors to just bear in mind that these are priority group artists. There's no mandatory, they must get an extra point or anything like that, but just to remember that there is a reason why they are priorities, to think about that as they are reading applications. It comes up in our discussions always, and it's part of what is considered in the discussion and in the decisions about who is going to receive a grant and who is not. But of course, they only know that if you tell them that you belong to one of these priority groups. So, there's spaces in our applications to do that. So just do remember that as well, that you need to speak to that in your applications. I did also want to point out that, especially if you're a first-time applicant, if you've never applied to the OAC before, we also have a series of programs that we refer to as third-party recommender programs, and they are listed in those lists under, in the bigger umbrella pages that you get to on our site. You'll see these are listed as well. But I just wanted to highlight them because they are smaller applications for the most part. They are smaller grants, anywhere from $500 to maybe $2,000. But it can be a bit quicker turnaround. And what happens with these grants is that we actually work with partners throughout the community, throughout the province, to help us decide who's going to receive these grants and disperse the grants. So for exhibition assistance, for instance, that is for if you have an exhibition at that's going to be available to the public. So that's already been confirmed, but you need some money to frame your work, for instance, or to make it exhibition ready. So the work is already made, and it's not your artist fee for the exhibition, but it's just, maybe you need some, like I say, framing is the most common use of these funds. But what you would apply through our system, but it goes to the local, the regional, I guess you would say, art gallery in your region. They are given a pot of money to use to and they decide, yep, that's an eligible project, and that individual will get the $500, $1,200, whatever is the appropriate amount to help them with that. So there's yeah, for also for Indigenous visual artist materials, we have a program like that, for theater creators, and recommender grants for writers. So this is where it would go to the different publishers throughout the province. A number of them would be reading your submission and deciding whether they believe that should receive a grant to help you keep writing in that case. So those are good ones to be aware of. Now, if you have questions, I'm going to say, call us. I'm happy to be your contact. This is Olga, our receptionist. She's happy to redirect your call to the person who's in managing the program that you're interested in. Certainly call the people on the side of the webpage that I showed you, where that those are the people who are going to know the details of that program. I'm happy to talk to you generally speaking, but I would always end up sending you to those individuals because they're the ones who know the specific details about each program, and it's best to speak to them directly. But please don't hesitate to give us a shout, especially if you're just not sure or you just want to confirm a few things. That's absolutely appropriate. So when preparing an application, as Rohit said, you're going to need to do a few things. First, you're going to become familiar with the program, find out when the program is eligible. So we have at the OAC, we do have deadlines for our applications, and the application form is available for 2 months prior to that deadline. So so we're February, March, April. So anything that has a deadline of April, let's say 18th, would be open about today, and you could go into our system. But of course, you have to have registered into our system. That you can do that anytime, and once you're in our system, then you can see what's open at any given time and start working on an application. We do have like I say, a deadline, but you could submit at any point in those 2 months. You don't have to wait to the last day. In fact, I would recommend you don't. But you can submit a month early if you really want to. But certainly a week early, there's nothing wrong with that. So you don't have to wait to the deadline to submit your application. Most applications have these components, not all. So again, you have to look at the specific program and find out what you need and what you need to include in the application. But most applications at the OAC are going to include a series of questions that you have to answer. You will be required to put some artistic examples, so you can't leave it blank. You won't be able to submit your application if they're not there, but you're going to want to pay attention to how many, how long should, if it's a dance work, how long is the example allowed to be? If it's visual arts, how many images are you allowed to put forward, etc. Again, most, not all, but most programs will have a budget that you need to include, because you're going to be asking for X amount of dollars, and you need to tell the assessors how you are going to spend those amount of dollars. And then support documents would be things like your resume, possibly the application will allow for letters of support or that kind of thing, but not always. So again, you're going to want to look if you have partners in your project that might be requiring a bio of the partner or a letter from your partner or something like that. So again, you just do have to pay attention to what is required and make sure you're putting in the appropriate things. If you put something that's different than what was asked for, you could be deemed ineligible and your application could be withdrawn. So you do want to pay attention. If you have any kind of disability that makes doing an application online or the way that we have it set up challenging for you and you need some support, we do have funds for you to help to pay someone to help you with that. So again, just check in with us about that if that's an issue for you. So we call our online system Nova, and you do have to have what we call a profile in Nova, which fundamentally means you're going to, create a login, usually your email address, and you're going to create a password, and then you're just going to fill in. Basically, we need your name, your address, an email address, this kind of thing, and that will be your profile. And again, at that point, you'll be able to see any programs that are open to you. And if you need help navigating through Nova, obviously that's something we can help you with as well. So I too have a few tips. And these are specific to our system. So for instance, some people have trouble with our Nova system if they're not using a different platform. So Chrome is the best. It's not the only. I actually don't always use it, but for some people, it does seem to be the best one to use when you're navigating the system. So that's something to bear in mind. And it's all the information like this is on our system for you to see. Do pay attention. So for again, if you have to submit a video of your work as part of your application, pay attention to what kind of document or you need to, if something needs to be a PDF, don't try to upload a Word document, things like that. It won't let you. It'll just be frustrating. So just pay attention to that. You can get timed out of our system, and obviously that's incredibly frustrating. So you're going to want to make sure you press the save button regularly, read all the instructions, and all of our deadlines are at 1 p.m. This is different funder to funder. So you're going to want to pay attention if you're applying to someone else. You're going to want to pay attention to what their deadline is. A couple of the ones that Rohit had given you, for instance, had a 5 p.m. deadline. Some are midnight. Ours is 1 p.m. The rationale being, if there are any troubles, we still have hours that, our whole team is available to help you out and support you. But again, as Rohit already said, it can get very busy on a deadline day. So if you are trying to submit your application at about 12:45, it can take longer than you think it's going to. And it could time out. So you're going to have to be careful about that. Of course, we're going to help you as much as we can. But if it's simply that you ran out of time because you didn't leave yourself enough time, that could be a problem. It is a machine, and it doesn't really matter how much I like you. It shuts down at 1 o'clock, and there's not a whole lot I can do about that. So do pay attention to your time on that. And I would always recommend trying to go for it at the very least the day before if possible. So yes, we emphasize that the 1 p.m. regularly. But once the deadline comes at 1 p.m., then it's closed. And if it's a program I'm managing, I now know how many applications I have and who has submitted and what kind of projects have come in once I have a chance to look through them all. And so that's what I do after a deadline. If it's a multidisciplinary program, for instance, so if it's our artists and communities and schools, it could have any number of disciplines included in there. There could be people working in literature, in dance, in puppetry, in film. It's everything, and probably does. So, but I look through that to see who, what kind of projects have been submitted. I look at what parts of the province they're coming from. I look at what kind of subject matters are being dealt with in the projects. And once I've done that kind of review, and once we've done some eligibility checks, then I will look out into the community to think, because at the OAC, it is not me that's making the decision. It is not the staff. It is a panel of your peers. So it is other artists and arts workers who are involved in the community, who are active in the community, that we then invite based on all the things I think I need around the table, all the expertise, all the experience that I think it needs to be there, that I can get in 5 people. Most of our panels are about 5 people. And I invite them to participate. Obviously, if they've applied or if they're involved in a project, they're not allowed to be on the jury. That would be considered a conflict of interest, and we have a pretty firm policy around that. And if they have been on an assessment panel recently, then again, we wouldn't be allowed to invite them again. We like to try to make sure that different people are around the table, right now the virtual table, so that it's not always the same people that are making the decisions. So, again, the different expertise that I'm looking for, I'm also looking to ensure that the different regions of the province, all of our priority groups are what I'm going to be thinking about. I'm going to want to make sure that I have an Indigenous assessor. I want to make sure that there's people with, different cultural backgrounds, different ages, different genders, all of that kind of thing is what we think about when putting out invitations. And then, of course, the individuals have to be willing to do it, have to be interested. They have to have time. It's an awful lot of work. But I think also it's also a great opportunity to be part of a panel. And so eventually we get a panel together, and once it's approved, then we send them all the applications. So we used to send them a big box or several boxes of paper applications. Now we just open a portal for them, and they have access to your applications and read them all at home and review everything that you submitted. And then we bring everybody together. Normally it would be in our offices so that everybody's together. Now, of course, it's on a Zoom call like this, and they discuss the applications and make the decisions based on whatever budget I have. Most of our programs are assessed using 3 criteria. Some have only one. Some programs are only assessed based on artistic merit. So you do want to double check this, but most of our project programs use these 3 equally weighed criteria of artistic merit, impact, and viability. So the merit being the quality of your work, of course, but the idea too of the project that you're submitting, and does it seem to be a good fit for you? We're not comparing your project to someone else's, really. We're looking at it based on what you have said your goal for your career is, and whether this seems to be the best next step for you, and does it make sense to the assessors that this would be something that you want to take on, and are they excited by it? Do they get a sense from you of that urgency that Rohit was speaking about, I think, a little bit, why is this so important for you? It is, for some reason. You want to do this. Make sure you convey that to the assessors. They too are artists and are going to understand that, but they need you to tell them. You need to paint the picture for them, so to speak. The impact is the impact on you as an artist, of course, how it's going to help develop your practice or your career. It may also be on any partners. Like if you are a choreographer and you're working with a group of dancers, how is this going to help them? What opportunities will it provide them? And then, of course, your intended audience, potentially, right? How is this going to have an impact on Ontarians? And then all of those things could be great, but then it also has to be a viable project. And so that's where they're going to be looking at your budget. Does it make sense? Have you thought about everything that you're going to need? Does your timeline make sense? Or do the people that you're looking for to help you out, does it seem like the right and appropriate team to make this a viable project? So they assess based on these criteria. They discuss thinking about this, and then they may end up making their decisions based on these criteria. Once the results are out, you would be notified as an applicant within our turnaround time is about 4.5 months. So if your deadline is in right today, February 18th, March, April, May, June, you'd be finding out probably at the end of June, early July. So bear that in mind too when you're thinking about what the project is. We don't fund retroactively. Sometimes you can, if the deadline is today, sometimes the program will allow your expenses to start today. Sometimes it's when you receive the notification. So again, you'll have to be careful and look at that. And you'll have to think about that, what risk you're prepared to take, because unfortunately not everybody's going to get a grant. So if you start moving forward before you know you have received the funding, you just want to be aware of that. So the check would be mailed to you if you are a recipient, and at that point you can get to work, and then you will have to report on it. And again, those are all on the website, what you would need to report based on how you use the funds. Bearing in mind that for individuals, grant money is taxable income. So again, it's an important thing to know. If you do not receive a grant, we know that this is disappointing. You will receive, it happens on the same timeline. Many of our programs, not all, but many will give specific feedback based on what was discussed and assessed by the assessors. Some will give more sort of general, this is what happened in general at this deadline. And we would encourage you to reapply. I don't know anybody who's been, including myself, most certainly, who has been successful at every grant a deadline. There's nothing stopping you from reapply. You can even reapply with the same project if you decide, you know what, I'm going to try again, and I'll push it and I'll do that project next year instead. If you're able to do that, you can apply with the same project again, or your next project. And so we say don't be discouraged. I realize that's easy for me to say, but really it does not mean that they didn't like your project. Unfortunately, our budgets are such always that we can't fund all the projects that they want to. There are hard decisions made, and a different jury may make slightly different decisions. So, and next time it will be a different group of people. So remember that too when you're thinking about whether to apply again or not. But touching in once again with the staff to get the some thoughts is always a good idea. So yes, number one on my tips is to call and speak to us about your idea. Similarly, like Rohit said, having someone else review your application. If you're in a band, yeah, your bandmate is probably not the best person just because they too are very immersed in the project and may not be able to step back and see. Someone who doesn't know your practice very well is the best person, exactly for what Rohit said, so that they can get an idea of, or if they get a good idea of what your project is and what you're trying to do, then you're probably in good shape. The spell check is on here and the grammar thing is on my list as well, just because sometimes assessors are reading hundreds of applications and it can be very challenging if an application is riddled with mistakes. That's not to say that your language needs to be perfect. We are well aware of the fact that people have different languages as their first language. Some people are better at writing than other people. We're very aware of that. We speak to assessors about that. We remind them of that. And all of our assessors really do go in with a spirit of generosity and caring. They want to give you the money, right? They really do. But if you can make it easier for them a little bit, then I would encourage that. Your support material is going to be really important. So the choices you make of what artistic examples you put forward should support the project you are asking for funding. That it shouldn't just be, oh, this is the favorite work I ever did, but I did it 15 years ago and it really has nothing to do with the project I'm asking them to support me with. That probably isn't the best choice. On the other hand, if you're revisiting a subject matter that you did 15 years ago and it's kind of reflecting back on that older work, then maybe that is the perfect work to submit. But think about it and make sure you don't leave that to the last minute. That can be a big mistake. So being detailed, but not repeating yourself is a good idea. And I've put in writing from the heart. People often ask me, what's the difference between the applications that get funded and those that don't? Sometimes there's error or there's problems or there's things that were left out or you forgot something or whatever, then that can be a problem. But, between two really good applications, often it's just, they just really got excited about the project because you are excited about the project, and that can be all the difference there is. When you're working on your budget, really think about how much money do you really need. So look at your expenses and then ask for that. Be realistic in what you're asking for. And then when you do get the grant, or if you do not get the grant, call us to ask for feedback, to ask how, what were the strengths and what were the weaknesses of your application. And this is my contact information. Like I say, I'm happy to be someone you can use to help navigate you through, and I can direct you to the people that are working in the program that you are interested in. And I know there have been questions coming in and things, so I'm going to try and take a peek at those now. But Jacqueline or Susan, if there's anything jumping out at you, if you could just yell at me.
Yes, absolutely.
Priority groups outside Toronto, yes, that includes Mississauga. Again, anything without if your postal code does not begin with M, then that is considered a priority group. And artists of color, yes, it does. The question is, are Asians included in this group? Yes, they are. Are there any programs open for writers right now? To be honest with you, I don't know. I would have to look. I believe we have some spring deadlines. So again, they would be available 2 months before. So anything that has a deadline within the next 2 months would be open. If it's more than 2 months, you can still get a link to the question on the web pages. It just wouldn't, so you can start thinking about what you're going to need to prepare for your application. You just wouldn't be able to work in the application quite yet. Self-nomination process for assessors. So I'm thinking that this is like, if you're interested in being an assessor, we are always looking for assessors. There is a place on our website where you can submit and say you're interested in being an assessor. You could send it to me and I can share it. It doesn't mean you'll be an assessor next week necessarily, although that has happened, because of that puzzle of putting together a panel that, sometimes I need a very specific thing and I'm looking for that person in the northern region, or I am looking for somebody who's worked a lot with seniors and I also need them to be from, you know, the Southwest or something like that. It may or may not work out perfectly immediately. So like I say, it could take a few months before you got an invitation. It could take a few years before that moment comes. But we do, when those resumes come in, we do get them as program officers and we share them. And we're always asking each other, do you know someone who you think might be good for my panel? I'm looking for this expertise right now. We're sharing that kind of information all the time. Yes, you could feel free to go to our website and submit. For nonprofit groups that wish to expand their repertoire or hire professional instructors, are there any OAC grants that might cover these expenses? Yeah, absolutely. So again, depending on the discipline, so folklore, music, and dance, if you go to the dance projects or some of the music project programs and look through, there's, again, depending on exactly what the project you're looking at, there's definitely in the music I think possibilities of that to help you with that. So I would say look at those programs and then call the people who manage them. But yeah, I think there's, if I'm understanding what you're looking for, I think you'll find something. How flexible is the OAC with deadlines for project completion? Once you receive a grant, we will give the final date, the final report due date will be based on when you've told us the project is going to be finished. So if you've told us it's going to be finished on July 1st, we give you a few more months and then the report is due at that point. If your project gets delayed or something changes and the timeline has had to change, we are very flexible, but you do have to tell us, because occasionally people do something and that's not eligible. Like, oh, I was going to do this, but now I've decided I'm going to go do it in Vancouver. Well, we wouldn't necessarily be supporting that. Or I was going to work with this artist, but now I've decided to work with a different artist. That may or may not be okay because the jury gave you the money to work with that artist. So do check in with us with any kind of changes, but as long as the activity takes place within 2 years of receiving the grant, you know, there's flexibility there. Okay, if your grant is not successful, should you proceed with the project anyway? That's really your call. Obviously, that's going to depend whether you can afford to or not. If you are involving other artists, you might not be able to pay them and you just won't be able to. And one of the questions in our grant application, of course, is, you know, what are you going to do if you don't receive any if you don't receive the funding, or if you don't receive as much as you asked for. In some cases, some of our grants, maybe you've asked for $15,000, but you're only going to, maybe it might be that you know, maybe you're only going to get 11,000. What are you going to do? And so, you know, to think through how could you scale your project down a little bit, perhaps, or something like that. But in terms of, you know, if you don't get any money from us, then you could either decide to go ahead, fundraise in different ways, go to other funding, or maybe you're going to postpone it and try for a grant at the next deadline. But obviously that's going to be up to you. Okay, if you do receive a grant in, you know, at a particular program, can you apply again? Again, that does depend a little bit. Most of the programs, I would say yes, as long as it's for a different project. There are some exceptions though, where you're only allowed to apply once a year or things like that. So again, it will depend on the project or the program, but usually the answer is yes for a different project. Okay, budget. Do artists ever include their own time as an expense? Yes, please include your time as an expense. This is what this money is for. The OAC is here to ensure that artists can have a professional practice. That's the whole point. So absolutely your time and any other artists that you're involving that should be paid. You should be paid for your time as a professional artist. You should be paying any other artists that you are using or working with in your project. And in fact, if you don't, you will likely not get the grant because it is other professional artists sitting around the table. Sometimes it's a requirement. Well, I would say it's always a requirement, but you know, sometimes it's very clearly laid out and you know, you wouldn't even be able to apply without showing that. But also the assessors are not going to look well on a project that is not paying the artists. Does OAC have a marketing grant like factor? Not just a marketing grant. No, in many programs, marketing expenses would be an eligible cost, but it wouldn't be, I can't think of a program that we have that's just for the marketing. So I think those are the questions I see at the moment. Okay, and so yeah, so now we want to know how much to pay yourself, right? Yeah, this is the tricky question. Most disciplines have some kind of an industry standard. So visual artists, the most sort of well-known one, I think, is the CARFAC standard. So this is an organization that sets the fees for professional visual artists, and there is a kind of a fee chart that you can look to. Dance has one. Music has a few different ones. So you need to ideally get in touch with the service organization for your discipline. So again, if you're a visual artist, to look at CARFAC. If you are a media artist, getting connected with Media Arts Network of Ontario, MANO, CADA, the Canadian Alliance of Dance Artists, all the Writers Union of Canada, all those kind of organizations can help you figure out what the appropriate amount you should be asking for in terms of paying yourself and paying others that you're working for. That's an awful lot of talking on my part. I'm happy to share the microphone.
Rohit, do you want to jump in and share some more information that might have bubbled up in the meantime?
I saw one question that somebody had asked: do Latin American artists and those who are immigrants, are you included in artists of color, people of color? Yes, absolutely. Really, anywhere you're coming from, if you identify as an artist of color, it usually refers to many different countries in the world where different cultures, different languages are spoken. And so if you identify, then you're considered an artist of color. And earlier in the chat, there was a question about, 10 songs for the songwriting grant factor. Do they have to be released? Double check the guidelines on that one. I don't know enough about that grant to know if they have to have been released or not. But in many cases, when in doubt, reach out to them and ask, because, these fine print details can sometimes make or break the application. And somebody had asked something about commissions. If you could just try again, asking your question, just explain it, maybe phrase it a little differently, maybe we can address the commissions question.
I was wondering if that was about the music commissioning grant, in which case it's at OAC anyway, there is that category. And again, I'm going to encourage you to call my music allies or allies in the colleagues in the music section. But if symphony orchestra is commissioning a composer to write a work for them or something like that, it's that kind of but it doesn't have to be that, but that would be a kind of an example of a commissioning grant. And so they sort of work together on the grant, the commissioner and the composer. For musicians, do you use union fees? Yeah, again, you would follow the industry standard is what we sort of say. So whatever practice you work in, you should be following whatever the standard is, and often it is a unionized amount. I would also speak to anybody that works in a similar way to you about what's, sometimes it is a little bit a personalized or a customized kind of amount that you're working with. As long as you can explain to the assessors how and why you've come up with that amount, because they might, if it's way more than what everybody else is putting in, they might wonder about that and be curious. If it's way under, they also will wonder about that.
We just got another question in. This is one for you, Maura. For musical projects, could it be another language other than English?
That's a good question. I think for music, it can. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's true. Although again, I'm going to get you to confirm that with my colleagues. You know, in literature, we have a problem with other languages. We don't support the writing of in other languages other than French and English currently. So that is a limitation of those programs. But for music, I think if the lyrics are written in a different language, I'm I don't I don't know that to be ineligible.
Wonderful. I think we're running, everyone's running out of questions. Are there any more questions? Please feel free to get them in the chat. Oh, here, which social media outlets do the panel of juries look at the most?
That's interesting. So for us, you know, they're only supposed to be making their assessment based on the application. So you know, it would be whatever you've included in your answers and in your support material. That is what they are using. We are not asking them to do any other research or checking up. I mean, it is anything that is public is fair game. So they might happen upon it. They might look at it. It's not a formal part of the assessment, unless it is, unless your application form in our operating programs, the websites are part of the assessment. So if there are programs where it says you can put your website or you're required to put a website, then you can be sure that they're going to be looking at that as part of the assessment. But if you have not put it in your application, then it's not officially any part of the assessment. Sometimes, you know, people get curious and they start looking around, but that's on a, you know, that's just their personal preference. So or what they, where they, or they might even just be like, oh yeah, I saw them on, you know, I'm part of that Twitter feed too that that person's on. You know, sometimes they do, they may well have a personal connection with you that they're aware of. Yeah, the commissioning grant, I'm going to have to get you to speak to the people who, I don't know. I've never run that program and I don't know. I'm sure on the webpage you're going to be able to see who is an eligible commissioner and who is an eligible composer. Off the top of my head, I would have to look into that as well. Okay, so there's a question for a music production grant that you're using your own home studio. Are those expenses eligible, is I think what we're getting at here. You know, this past year, everything has been thrown into such disarray, and we know that people are working in really different ways right now. So we have looked at all of our programs and have really tried to ensure that anything that was prohibitive, intentionally or not, previously is now eligible. So you know, again, as long as it's considered an eligible expense, whether you're you know, covering that at somebody else's studio or your own, it should be fine. If you're not sure, if it's not clear on the webpage and you just want to double check, then obviously give them a shout. But we have tried to ensure. So for instance, a lot of our programs used to say for live performance, blah, 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 blah. We now know that live performance is not the given that we used to think it was. So now the wording around that has been changed. So things like that, or different kinds of expenses that have become necessary now are eligible where maybe they weren't a year ago. So hopefully that has been caught. But if you're seeing something that you're not sure about, just give us a shout before the deadline. And obviously, yes, I say all this about being open and available to you, which of course we are. But the day before, or even 4 days before the deadline, it starts to get to the point where we can't get back to everybody. So the sooner you can get in touch, the better.
That's maybe one for Rohit. There's a question about for factor grants. Does online social media presence play a factor for resume CV reviewing?
Yeah, so if you are asked to provide a resume, they're actually looking for your professional experience and your history and what have you done. Social media wouldn't play a role, but with some funders, you actually see a box to put your social media. If you're ever asked for a box, or if it says social media specifically, or it says Twitter, please insert the link, Facebook, please insert the link, that is part of that assessment. So every funder is different, and you know, please always remember that as a professional artist, you need to put your best foot forward. You need to avoid things like profanity or anything controversial on your social media, because it's going to be looked at. And then there was a comment about, no matter which grant we apply for, if we're ineligible, we'll always be notified of the results, right? Really depends on how many applicants there are. If there are 5,000 applicants and the funder doesn't usually receive that many applications, they may not be sending a letter to everyone. It's not always guaranteed. You need to do the homework to go back, log into that portal, check the results. If there are no results, you need to contact the funder after a reasonable amount of time. Usually those timeframes are written on the guidelines of the grant. And so you should wait until it says, you'll be notified of results, 2 months, 4 months, etc. Wait until that time, then reach out to the funder, always follow up.
Yeah, I will just say at OAC, yes, you would be notified if you're ineligible, and you'll be explained what makes your application ineligible. There's a specific question. We launched an arts response initiative this year to address barriers because of COVID that had an October 20th deadline for individuals, if that's the one you applied to. It follows our normal process of about 4.5 months. So we're looking at probably early March for notification. And so people will be notified if they were ineligible, if they're a recipient, or if they're not a recipient at that time. You can always find, and this is a good thing to do too, if you're considering a program and you're not quite sure if it's a fit, to look at past recipients. We have a results part of our webpage where you can find previous grant results, and you'll see who's been a recipient in the past, and it might give you a sense of whether that's like, oh yeah, that's kind of like who I am. So it sort of an indication of what a good fit might be.
Feel much more confident going into writing my next grant, and I'm sure everybody else does too. And I think the takeaway is, when in doubt, contact your program officer. Thanks, Maura.